Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 173rd edition of the Frank and Stan chat. And it's Happy New Year. The date is the 12th of January 2024, and it's the first chat of the year. And those of you watching on the video will notice that we have a guest. So we have Rhonda with us this morning. Hello, Rhonda.
Hi, Frank.
Hi,
Hi,
Rhonda.
Stan.
And
Good to
hi,
be
Stan.
here.
I think you've had a very disrupted Christmas.
Yeah.
Didn't really get to Christmas dinner, did you?
No, we didn't manage a family Christmas dinner or family Christmas get together, really.
Uh,
Still, it's I seem to be starting all these by saying how
I
everybody in the
know.
family's
Actually, there
ill.
is a
So I'm
theme
trying to get
developing
away
here.
from that. The one person who wasn't ill through it all was me.
Oh.
Oh, no.
Now, Rhonda, you're in Spain, southern Spain,
Yes,
aren't you?
I am
So,
based in Spain, so I'm very active between Spain and the UK. I was working remotely before it was permitted, so I've pretty much been working remotely since about 2015. So now I kind of divide my time between the UK and Spain, and yeah, I'm just really excited to be here and talk with you all since I see all the tweets on Twitter about your show. So it's a lot of good engagement with your
well, it's
audience.
great. I mean, it's our privilege to have people like yourself on the
Yes.
chat. It really is. So, just give a little bit of. We know each other through a not-for-profit organization called InnovateHer, which is trying to get more women, yeah, females, into the digital businesses, into the digital world. But that's just a small part, isn't it, Rhonda, of your life?
Yeah,
So just
absolutely.
tell us a little bit more about what other stuff you do.
Sure. So I had the pleasure to first connect with you, Frank, as you know, in 2020 when I became the chair of the board for InnovateHer. And outside of that, I'm in the technology space more broadly, but have previously worked in the mobile industries, the internet industries, and the data industry. And a lot of my work focuses on topic areas like capacity building. So I've done a lot of work training governments in relation to policies. I also do a bit of DEI training. That's not actually on my LinkedIn. I have one company, BRK Ujima, that I do that with. I lead up Panoply Digital, which is a company that basically supports multilateral organizations, NGOs, and even governments with international development projects. So all of my work is based in low and middle income country context, but that can also include low and middle income context even within high income countries. So I'm originally from the United States, and as a Black person in the U.S., there's a lot of gaps and inequalities there. It was the same when I came to the UK. So I'm just very passionate about working to address inequalities for people in the ways that I can. And education is one of my primary tools to do that. And as Mandela said, it's one of the weapons that can be used to change the world. So I'm trying to do my part there as much as possible.
Well, I mean, I didn't know all of that.
Yeah.
I've known you for so many years. I mean, because you do. I mean, when we meet, we're very focused on the work, aren't we?
Yes.
And only recently, actually, we met face to face for the first
Face
time.
to face. Yeah.
But one of the things that just has triggered it for me is, yeah, how have you managed to be successful? I mean, the obstacles you've had to overcome. I mean, what is it within your character? What is it that you've been able to bring here to make that difference for you and to be this positive example or of how it can be done despite all the challenges?
Well, I think one of the things that I've really benefited from is that all of my postgraduate education, so after earning my bachelor's degrees, all of the programs that I studied were from like critical perspectives, and I didn't know that they would be when I first signed up. So my first master's in applied linguistics, the people that I worked with were contemporaries who had studied with Paulo Freire, Bell Hooks, Foucault, so very kind of radical critical thinkers within the education sector. And then likewise, when I did my second master's in sustainable development with a focus on technology, the theorists that we engage with primarily were all coming from a radical perspective. So I think for me, what I've consistently tried to do is to take those lessons and apply it to my work. And it just worked out as well that the philosophies that I learned were what I had always felt as an international development professional and teacher, but was never able to articulate on my own. So I would say that has helped, first and foremost. And then I would say that being a Black woman and kind of being minoritized in several different intersections, I'm very good at listening, and so I have a lot of incredible people around me from all walks of life. And I maintain these connections both in person and virtually, but having a really good sounding board has actually helped me quite a bit. I think that I've probably been prevented from making several mistakes professionally because I have good counsel. And so I would say that, yeah, these are my two main secrets that kind of keep me, yeah, where I
It's funny
am.
because
Fantastic.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting, Stan. When I work with Rhonda, she's very good at sort of encouraging the board members to be giving. So in effect, it's never Rhonda's show. It isn't, and actually, she's always very keen to get contributions from everybody. But
Mhm.
actually, but in a way, Rhonda, you are a bit of a disruptor, aren't you?
Yes.
So you're sort of like this sort of well, the way you manage and deal with people is very gentle, but actually it's
Mhm.
quite disruptive. So how do you manage
Yeah.
that? You smile a lot
What's the
and
saying? Speak softly and carry a big stick. I think it's, I benefited a lot of my life from people who were disruptors themselves, and like my professional mentor and friend Sonia George, who works in the international development space, has just been one of those women who I've seen her use her privilege for good consistently. And so, growing up, I didn't have much, and now I have quite a bit, comparatively speaking. And so, I think for me, I feel compelled to basically to help do the same for others. So that was one of the reasons that I linked up with Innovate Her in the UK, because I was a woman in tech at the time, and with their goal being to help more girls get into tech and help tech be ready to collaborate with more girls. It was such an important thing for me, not only as the mother to a daughter myself, but also being someone who entered the tech sector later in her career, because I started out as a teacher, and that was my first profession. So yeah, I think I've benefited from seeing positive examples of others.
brilliant,
Well,
brilliant.
I looked at your website and I was just starstruck at what
Stan,
you've achieved and
we've
what
just
you've
not been
done.
working hard enough.
No, it just made me feel as though, wow, and you think, the things you've done, you think, well, I've achieved quite a bit. It was insignificant compared to what your website does.
Yeah, I think the thing that Stan was mentioning was the sort of the worldwide impact that you're having. The fact that you're not, yeah, but you're in Spain here, but you've been in America, you're in sort of generally Europe, but there's also connections in Africa as well, from what the website's saying.
Absolutely. So, at the start of my career, I was a teacher and I taught in the US. And then after that, I moved on and I taught in South Korea, Equatorial Guinea, and then Madagascar as part of the US Peace Corps. And the experiences that I had in South Korea to a lesser extent, but in Equatorial Guinea and Madagascar, kind of open up my eyes to the field of international development. And so I can say that, a lot of the work that I have done abroad, I grew up, most people in my family have never left the country. And, I've now been to, I think, upwards of 80 different places myself, maybe 80 different countries. And so being able to travel and to go and see new places is really like a learning experience for me because it helps me to build empathy, and I think that that's how I've been able to really do what I do because I can listen to people, I can be empathetic, and then also try to devise creative solutions. And I think that's a lot of the work that we do on Innovate Her board, Frank, like
Yeah.
trying to help Chelsea creatively think outside the box with the different experiences that she encounters. And having been to so many places and having lived in many different places as well has given me that kind of broad-based knowledge.
But I would say
You do
just
realise, Rhonda, you're not actually old enough to have done all those things.
one thing just to plug for Innovate Her, if there's anybody watching who's particularly if you're in a secondary school or you're in a post-16 institution, yeah, Innovate Her is available online. You just have to connect with them and they'll connect back with you, particularly if you're in the north or north west or the north of England and northern Wales as well. So they're stretching out there. But even if you're not and you want to connect, I'm sure Chelsea and the team will be very happy to chat to you about the opportunities that come. And it's all free. It's amazing.
Yeah,
Free.
yeah, and they're always looking for new sponsors. So
Yes.
thank you
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. So I mean, they have some big ones, don't they? I mean, there's BAE and are in there as well, and the co-op and others. So it's not.
Yeah.
This is not a sort of flimsy little organization. It's got some big backers
No.
behind it. Yeah.
And they just celebrated their 10 years. So it's been a huge honor to be in collaboration with such an incredible organization doing so much work. And I think that Chelsea has been through a lot of ups and downs, and it's so good to just see her really continuing to grow as a leader. And I think that's one thing for me that also has characterized my career because my mentor was never, kind of worried that I might do better than her. It kind of frees you to help as many people as you can to be themselves, to live their best lives. And I think, in many ways we've seen that with the evolution of Chelsea's leadership. So yeah, just putting a lot of those good teachings into practice.
Definitely, definitely. Okay, Stan. So, what's caught your eye this week?
Well, the post office scandal has caught my eye every day, I think, for the last couple of weeks. But it relates so closely to what Rhonda's saying there about lack of supervision and lack of somebody, a critical friend, a mentor, somebody who says, "But have you thought this might be the problem?" And it struck me, having watched the drama rather than delve into the whole thing, that somebody in that organization should have been saying, but hang on a minute, this is too many people that appear to be robbing or thieving or and everybody's saying the same thing. So there's a pattern here that somebody should have picked up on and said, we need to rethink what we're doing and the way we're treating people. And it would appear that person was never there, or I think it's Google that had the empty chair at the meeting, and the empty chair is to represent people who aren't represented within the group, and it's to remind you that, for instance, it might be a customer that you don't have a customer, but the empty chair there is to say we need to reflect the customer's point of view as well.
Yeah.
So it reminds a team or a meeting that there are other people whose views they ought to think about. And I like the idea of having the empty chair in the meeting.
For me, it was all around those things, wasn't it? Around the governance of all of this and the the sort of warped sense of leadership that was being offered, not just by, at all different levels. This is not just an issue, is it, that was understood by, say, the CEO of the post office. This is other people within that organization going quite low down, I suspect, knew quite a lot about this. And it's interesting you're here today, Rhonda, because Fujitsu apparently, you have to be careful what you say, apparently knew there was a problem with the software, but there's a problem with all software.
Yeah.
This idea that it's infallible, You know, I think it's interesting that the post office manage the post office, what they're called postmasters and postmistresses,
Yeah.
were fighting against the computer. We're fighting against the technology, and actually, some of them just thought it must be me, you know, because the
Yeah.
technology is infallible. You know, whereas we know that, you know, the fact that you have updates for software on your computer tells you that there's a little bug here or a glitch there. You know, what's your take on it?
Oh gosh. I mean, when I first learned about this years ago, because I think it was a smaller thing and I didn't understand why it became a bigger thing, but it seems someone wrote like a fuller story of it. And I mean, it's what we learn when you kind of learn a more radical critical approach to technology. You know that people shape technology. Technology is just there on its own, but we are the ones who make it work for us or don't. And I think in this case, we ceded all reason and just assumed that, of course, the machine is going to be smarter than man. And I think is such a cautionary tale for where we find ourselves
Mm,
right now, actually, because in the era of generative AI, we have a lot of people who are kind of letting machines think for them and not having some more critical engagement with what all this is going to mean further down the line. And there have been, so many incredible women who have been raising the alarms about this, such as Timnit Gebru, Joy Buluomini, Margaret Mitchell, and yet we're still seeing the same conversations that are kind of like, well, oh, almost helpless. Like, what can we do? It's just going
mm,
to happen. We have to just let it happen, and not enough time being taken to address things like what Stan has pointed out. Like, if it seemed unusual that so many people were allegedly stealing, why not investigate that? Because I'm sure the cost that it would have been made would have been so much less than the many people's lives who were ruined. I mean, I read some of those stories years ago about the people that were affected, and it was just so sad. So I'm really, really glad that the light is being shown on this. I actually had an experience myself with Fujitsu. I think it was in 2023 where I gave a presentation on gender data and technology. And it was interesting because not everybody in the room, and I don't want to assume that their backgrounds were primarily technical, but not everybody in the room liked kind of the social mixing with the technology. They
Right.
saw things as very black and white. And I think that that is one big thing that also may have affected the outcomes here. There's still a lot of
mm.
technologists that think in that manner, ones and
Right.
zeros, they
The
say.
other
Right.
bit that
Well,
got
yeah.
the other bit that got to me, Frank, was to do with the investigation. And with everything we've been doing with Ofsted and the way to go about things and that
Mm.
relationship, that those investigations were in fact inspections by another name. And the style and the approach was clearly the wrong one in order
Yeah,
to,
and also determined prior, in effect, as a sense of
yeah,
determined prior to the investigation. You know,
yeah, we've
we know
already
what we want the
decided that,
outcome. Yeah,
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 we've already decided the outcome. Now we're coming to test the evidence.
yes,
Uh,
a
that's
hypothesis. Yeah,
but
yeah,
it made me laugh in the in Parliament yesterday. I think it was there was in part of the inquiry. They were talking to one of the investigators, and you could just see you didn't need to know anymore to see. Oh, sorry.
it's all right. It's okay. Rhonda, what's caught your eye this week?
Yeah, so for me, what was a big eye-opening thing has been the spotlight on the case that South Africa has brought at the International Court of Justice against Israel for alleged crimes of genocide. And one of the tweets that kind of rocked me to my core yesterday was someone who said, imagine, South Africa arguing this case of genocide in the Netherlands, the country that basically helped supply South Africa, well, the
Yes,
government at
yes,
that time,
yes.
to commit their own atrocities. And, a lot of people also said that people who lived through apartheid at that time were, of course, now these lawyers that were arguing the case against Israel. And for me, that was just very powerful because, you know, I'm 40, and so lived part of my life when there was apartheid in South Africa, and then also being there when Mandela exited and everything, and just also knowing that, you know, in Palestine there's this huge statue of Mandela as well. It struck me that, you know, there were so many different layers to this moment in the Hague, but then also seeing on Twitter that at least in the U.S. there was no coverage on it on any of our major broadcast
Wow.
networks, and I think that that's going to have so many implications. In terms of our elections that are coming up this year, because I think, and you had mentioned this before, Frank, in terms of the generational differences. So I think the youth, and particularly Gen Z, are very much attuned to what's going on, and I think, you know, want there to be a real and concrete discussion about what's happening in the Middle East region. And because that's not happening, we're continuing to see these protests and things like that. So I think, you know, the media can manufacture consent. And as an American, I think it was a very bad thing that our major networks did not carry what was such a historic moment. So again, I think those intersections of technology and the social for me, even in that situation, are quite stark.
Yeah, and I was saying to you before that I watch Channel 4 News. They did cover it in the UK.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
didn't. I don't tend to watch the BBC News or ITV News very much, but actually, I was pleased to see they covered it. But I was not aware that there was such little coverage in the States on this.
Yeah, yeah.
But in a way, it's sort of for me, you know, this is the power of social media as well, isn't it? You know that particularly for a younger generation that's been brought up with it, you know, that actually the power of these networks is probably diminishing, you know, and
Oh, yeah.
there's danger in that as well. I do
Mhm.
appreciate that, but actually other voices can be heard, other viewpoints can be heard, you know, through social media. Some of them are not well considered, but
Mm.
you have to. And actually, one of the things we've been talking about in the UK, but
Mhm.
particularly in England, is there isn't sufficient education or training for young people on how to use social media well, how to identify potential sort of poor sources of information, you know, to detect bias and what have you in this. You know, if ever we were to look now at creating an education system, I think most of us would say we need to cover that. You know, there's
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
abuse online and all of this is an integral part of growing up in the modern world, and many schools simply don't address it sufficiently. Well, don't address it. Others don't address it
Yeah, no,
sufficiently
I would say not at all. And I mean, when I taught in higher education in the US, and but my role was part of my role was to develop and deliver youth leadership programs. And at the time I was living in Boston, Massachusetts, and there was this epidemic, I guess we can call it, of young girls at the time who were getting their first experiences on social media, but then committing suicide because they were being bullied so much. And so at that time, like my programmatic work was in part around anti-bullying, but then because I was also beginning to look at technology, that was coming into play. And as I searched, there was nothing really on digital citizenship. And then when I moved to the UK, likewise, there's not much you can get consistently on digital citizenship, and I think, gosh, we are suffering for it right now. And so this is something I continue to push for that reason. It's a huge gap, Frank. You're absolutely right.
Mm. Well, what's caught my eye
Mm.
is we have had a guest on here on two occasions. Isha Asim. Isha was the head girl at Co-op Academy, North Manchester. She went on to study law at university, um, and she's been a political activist ever since I've met her. I met her when she was, I think, probably about 14, and so she's been a member of the the youth parliament. So she, this youth parliament network, every local authority has a couple of members. She was one of those. She was elected. She was a leader of the of student strikes in Manchester, which didn't go down well with the college she was studying at, but she was committed to it. But she's been an activist working with some youth groups, and she's blogged this week about a feeling of being discarded as a young person, and also a feeling that, in effect, some youth groups, because they're youth, feel as though they need to take young people into their fold, but actually they're not really willing to listen to some of the hard messages that are portrayed by some young people, not necessarily about society, but perhaps about the organization that they're meant to be working within. And I think that it's quite a bold move by Isha, but it does make me think about taking it back to school, how many young people are actually involved in school councils and this sort of stuff that go on. But actually, it's a little bit of a sop, that actually we have the school council, it looks good, but actually the sorts of issues that they talk about are not the sort of issues that are really going to hurt or affect many children and young people in the school. So, Stan, you mentioned before about having young people involved in interviews for staff at schools.
Yeah. In a few situations where that happened, and I have to say, where I've seen it happen, either as a panel, a young people's panel, or actually in a formal interview situation as well, where when it comes to the debate afterwards, their viewpoint is virtually ignored, as if well, they don't really know, they want the soft one who was smiling at them all the time. It feels like tokenism often, and I wish there was a better way of doing it so that there was genuine involvement. Equally, I've sat on school boards where children, young people have been brought in to represent, and actually sat through meetings an hour, 2 hours long, that had nothing to do with them, and I just felt absolutely sorry that they were there and really just wasting their time to be able to say that on this family board we have student representatives, and that there's a balance somewhere where you gather their views and you take notice of them without either sitting them in a meeting where they're not part of the meeting, if you're honest, or asking for their views and then just ignoring them.
It's triggered something. I hadn't thought of this before, but I remember, Rhonda, there's a company or group. It's not actually a company. It's a cooperative. It's called the Co-op in the UK, and I was fortunate to run the school section of that organisation. And prior to their annual meeting, where all the members are invited, to this big place in Manchester, the Co-op board meet for a dinner. And when I was involved, they always invited students from each of our secondary academies to the dinner. And I remember Isha being invited for her year, and she sat next to a former government minister who was also a lawyer. And Isha mentioned that she was, wanted to go down this sort of legal route. And this government minister tapped on the table and said, "I think we ought to listen to what Isha's got to say." So Isha was then stood up. There was about 40 of us, round tables, quite posh. And what she offered, was, I mean, it was heartbreaking, because in a way some of it was really good about the work that the trust was doing, but also it was showing there are things that we'd not done. Things were still wrong. And I thought, wow, Isha, what a powerful statement that is, and also the confidence to be able to do it. But actually, the fact that I think all of us wanted to improve. That was the key thing. We wanted to know what was it that was holding others back. Yeah, that
Well,
for me.
you invited me up to that secondary school to have a look round because of its range of improvement that it had made, and I happened to bump into whether she was taking us around because she was head girl. I don't
Yeah.
recall that, or whether But she absolutely rocked me on my heels when I said, you know, bear in mind where the school is and the problems it had had. And I said, and what are you hoping to do, you know, when you go on from here? And she said, I'm going to be a barrister.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
And I
It's really
mean, well
interesting.
on the way to doing it.
She wanted to. She qualified with her at Manchester with her degree. Wanted to actually study down in London. She got a place at a London university, but without giving too much away, it for even for us as a family, actually putting somebody up in a London university for any length of time is a massive financial commitment.
Oh
So
yeah.
there's something here as well about these blocks that there are. You think, oh yeah, get to university, that's you're there, but actually of course that's just the first step, isn't it? And then if you want to take it further, so there are these further blocks that are there, that because I don't face them regularly, I'm not familiar with, they're not on my radar all the time. But that did shock me as well, that we were holding back somebody like Isha from progressing her career simply because that university course was the one that she wanted, and she couldn't get there. She couldn't
Yeah.
sustain it.
When I moved to the UK in 2011, that was when they were having the massive protests. Some of my friends were protesting against the hike in education costs. And as an American, I just could not understand how you go from free to what they had in the UK. And in the US, it was done in part as segregation was taken away, and it became a way to then keep ethnic minorities out of schools.
Cool. Yeah.
But in the UK, you didn't really quite have that same thing. So it was quite shocking to watch. And as someone who just recently paid off my student loan debt, five-figure student loan debt, I just don't know what they're trying to set people up for in the UK, because salaries are already quite low when you compare to other places. So it's been really difficult, because I think if you are a young person now, the opportunities that you have are so different and in some ways limited to people, I would say, even in my generation as a millennial. And yet people keep saying that they don't work hard enough, they're not grateful, and they have to deal with things like what you just recounted, Frank. And yeah, I really feel for them, and I think that they will be the catalyst for some change, because they're getting squeezed in so many ways that we just did not have to deal with in our generations.
Well,
I'm reminded, Frank, just to finish, of when we talk about student voice, of being in a situation where I had to chat to a number of school refusers, or those that were least likely to attend school. And there was one 14, 15-year-old girl who sat arms folded like this through, I'm not going to take part in this. And so I said, so what's your story? And she said, well, I I wag school as much as I can. I don't turn up. And she said, but the best thing about it is, what's the punishment for me? I've been suspended. Who thought that one up? So for not attending school, she was suspended from school.
yeah. Well, actually,
Uh,
next week, Stan, we'll talk about the crisis that there is in school attendance. We'll cover that for next week. But Rhonda, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Yeah.
You've taken us
sure.
down areas that we've not discussed before, and that's fantastic. And we'd love, I say this every time, but guests are so brilliant. We'd love to have you back. So
Oh, I would love it.
I'll
I
reach
would
out
love
to
it.
you. We'll get something in for
I
if we're
got
still
more free
running.
time
If we're
now,
still
so
running, uh,
yeah,
we'll look for another day.
absolutely.
But thank you so much.
Well, I would love, I don't know if you all get into political talks, but once we get back to the elections later this year, it seems that that would be very interesting for me, because it'll be the first election that I can vote in as a British citizen. So I'm quite
Oh
excited.
wow! Right, fabulous. Right, okay. Well, I'll put that in the diary for the
Yeah.
autumn.
Well,
Great.
enjoy this afternoon in Grenada.
Thank you. I will, Stan.
Okay,
Thanks.
I'm just going to close it now. So we'll see you all next week, and well, we're actually going to be talking about safeguarding next week. So we have an expert on safeguarding. So a slightly different sort of topic that we're going to be covering. But I hope you all have a good week, and we'll see you all then. Bye bye.
Right.